I've already recorded half of this video, but I can't read apparently because I already actually wrote a script and it wasn't what I was reading. Cool. So anyway, I I watched an episode of a documentary series around women's healthcare in the UK. One of the episodes was around Tanya Bardsley. I think that's how you pronounce her last name, who is from the show Housewives of Cheshire. Very random, I know. I've never seen this show. So she's a footballer's wife, and that's basically why she is / became famous. The episode that she did for this documentary series was made in 2022, and it was around late diagnosed ADHD in women. It was called Me and ADHD, and on the series in general, they are usually called something along the lines that's women's health related, and me. Or me and insert healthcare issue here, following different women who are all from different celebrity backgrounds, and they all have their own topic that they are covering. So, for example, one of the other ones was about IVF. Some parts frustrate me about this particular episode with Tanya, such as the idea of girl ADHD versus boy ADHD. You know, it's just not really a thing. ADHD is like autism, as it's now understood, that, you know, autism traits are not gendered, and also much like autism is no longer being separated into hyperactive ADHD and what was the other one, daydreaming ADHD. Inattentive, that's the one. Whereas, you know, autism is still being separated into levels like 1, 2, and 3, instead of using Nazi names. It is a lot more complex than these generalizations being used. And it is frustrating to see this reflected in a documentary, what is constantly being pushed in a lot of mainstream media articles as well, when they are incorrect. Also, I am frustrated by the idea of different types of ADHD when it is now understood to actually just be one ADHD, and like I was saying, a spectrum of different traits and how those traits present themselves and impact the individuals. Like I said, again, similar to autism and how autism is understood. I do like that this episode obviously is from a woman's point of view, as that obviously is the intention of this show anyway, but also that ADHD is being discussed from a slightly older demographic, and it is a much later diagnosis than what most people are now kind of considering as late diagnosis. I mean, even my diagnosis isn't that late compared to somebody who was diagnosed in their 40s or older. Because when was I diagnosed? Was I 25? 7? I think I was 27. It's been a while. Tanya wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until she was in her 40s. And I do also like how she does talk about how she did try ADHD medication, probably stimulants. I can't remember if she specified, but she had a seizure at the same sort of time as when she started taking ADHD medication, and that there are many factors as to why someone might have a seizure. But for her personally, having had the seizure around the same time as trying this new medication has made her more hesitant to try different kinds of ADHD medications or retry the same one again, which is like fair. That's a reasonable reaction. But I do appreciate her acknowledging that. This is a little bit different to how Sam Thompson experienced ADHD medication in his documentary. I talked about that in a previous video, where when he tried medication, he literally tried one pill once and decided it wasn't for him, made him feel like he wasn't himself, and never tried it again, never tried any other medications, etc., whilst also not actually covering what the medication was at all. Didn't cover anything about the titration period or process or any other kinds of instructions around that. I felt like Sam Thompson's point of view on medication was a little bit more scaremongering than Tanya's version in this episode is, and she literally had a seizure. But she's very chill and level-headed about this, even though she's admitted she is scared to try other medications. She has been very reasonable in saying that it is very unlikely it's just the medication she tried, and it may not cause her any issues if she used a different medication. But yeah, so like I do really appreciate her covering all of that in this episode, where Sam just didn't. But yeah, so she has said that it has put her off of trialing any ADHD medication for now. She has not definitively said ever. She has said for now. She also has a son who has ADHD as well. So it is also talking from the point of view as a parent with ADHD who also has a child with ADHD, which I do think is rarely discussed on television or shown anywhere, really. We still have a culture where it's a neurotypical parent coping with a neurodivergent child. So yeah, there's numerous layers to this episode, including being a late diagnosed woman, being a parent with ADHD, being a parent of a child with ADHD, and the combination of all of these things together. However, the main issue that I personally have with this as well is that obviously they have a lot more financial stability, meaning that they have a lot more access to other forms of support outside of medication and outside of using things like adult social care. So Tanya can afford to hire people to support her in a way that many people who are late diagnosed autistic or ADHD physically cannot do due to that price point. And also, like, I think that's maybe something that really wasn't covered in this episode, is how much more likely ADHDers are going to be in some kind of financial distress specifically because of their ADHD. You're more likely to lose your wallet, lose your card, not cancel subscriptions because you've forgotten, not realize that you are paying for certain things, missing smaller details like maybe additional tax or charges, and obviously many more things like that. If you're running late as well, you're more likely to drive your own car and have to pay for parking, get public transport instead of walking, or even getting a taxi. And all of those add up when you may not actually necessarily need to pay for those things if you were able to keep track of time at all. So yeah, like this point as well isn't acknowledged really at all in this documentary episode, which is unlike, Lady Gaga's documentary 5'2", where she acknowledges her privilege of having access to money and pain treatments, like massage therapies, because when she needs them, she acknowledges that she finds it hard to manage her own condition even with all of that privilege. Whereas other people with fibromyalgia who don't have her kind of bank account can't do those basic things, and she can't personally imagine what that would be like to not be able to take care of those things in that way, because she has that access, other people don't, but she knows she wouldn't be coping without the access to those things. So yeah, like I do appreciate when people with money, people with minor celebrity or major celebrity, acknowledge that they are in a different playing field to other people with their conditions. Like I was saying, Tanya can really afford things for herself, but also for her son to support both of them with their ADHD. She could probably have a full-time personal assistant for herself and or for her son, someone who can help support her son when he is struggling in school, like a private tutor, having her own access to private therapy, but also private therapy for her son as well if necessary. And also the ability to try and test medications or other kinds of support, even if they cost a lot of money, to see what works best for them, which many people just cannot do. They have to either make do with the free options or really dedicate their time and money to a particular kind of support. You can't really very easily trial different things, especially in the UK with how the NHS works, and especially with how a lot of right to choose and contracted services work as well. I mean, I've constantly had nightmare after nightmare with basically the people who treat my ADHD in Psychiatry UK, still waiting. I mean, to be fair, when I'm recording, my ADHD appointment will be tomorrow. But I bet by Thursday, you know, I'm still going to be waiting for any new medications. And I vaguely remember being like 2 options for ADHD, which was you either try medication or you try ADHD coaching. And then with autism, there just wasn't any. They were like, right, good luck, see you later. Tanya does also talk about suicide in this episode, so that's a content warning that I would advise you to be wary of. I do think it's an important aspect to include in talking about ADHD, as many people who grow up with a late diagnosis, you know, not being diagnosed most of their life, lacking in support that they actually often really needed, means that they usually will have a lower self-esteem and are more likely to have mental health issues, including things like anxiety, depression, trauma, etc. So yeah, it's just a thing I'm glad that was covered, even though it's obviously a difficult topic to discuss, whether it's your own experiences or listening and having a conversation with somebody else about their experience. Tanya also has a friend who has ADHD, who is a man, a white cis man, and he admits and acknowledges that he was a very horrible person to other people before he was diagnosed and thought it was okay. But post-diagnosis, he has changed how he does things because he realised that he was just being generally unkind and it wasn't fair on the people around him, which, like, whilst not really on, like, not super on topic, I'm glad it is something that was included as well, because I do think a lot of, especially white cis men, whether they were diagnosed or not with ADHD, often just think it is fine to just treat people really badly all the time for no reason. And as well, a lot of people, regardless of their gender, however, still usually mainly white people who are neurodivergent, often will still use that neurodivergent label, including ADHD, as like a shield for them being a terrible person or doing terrible things or being unkind. So I am glad that at least in some capacity that was kind of like discussed in this, and especially kind of showing how white cis men are more likely to like kind of continue getting away with stuff like that over anybody else. There are again some aspects of this episode that I find irritating to watch as a chronically ill and physically disabled person. Whilst I understand it's something that many ADHDers who are not physically disabled do to manage their ADHD, it is still frustrating to see people continually peddling the idea of exercise curing, managing, fixing ADHD. So like, I have also met numerous people in real life, again, usually men, usually cis men, who have and do use exercise as a way of managing their ADHD. Like, wish that were me, but it ain't. Like, the only types of ADHD that exist are the exercise ADHD and the sleepy ADHD. And guess which one I got? This one. I want to lay down again. I want to close my eyes and lay down. See, is that okay? Can I do that? Thank you. So yeah, it's just something that I find frustrating because that's also a point of view that never really gets addressed, is the chronically ill ADHDers. Most of us have things like fibromyalgia, POTS, chronic fatigue, tummy problems. And of course, in general, many average non-physically disabled people do find that the gym helps them manage their ADHD, whether it is just going to the gym or doing some other form of physical activity like going for a walk or being part of, like, you know, a team, doing team sports. And as well, like, I can see this being frustrating to like the average person as well, because even accessing things like exercise and the gym cost money that most people just don't have anymore. Like, how much is a gym membership these days? I looked recently and they're like 50 quid a month. Like, I didn't want to pay for £20 a month like 4 years ago when it was £20 a month. And I didn't want to pay less than that when 10 years ago it was less than that, you know? Like, I definitely don't want to pay 50 fucking pound a month that I might not even go to, either because of my physical health or my ADHD. You know? One of the things I personally find with my ADHD, if we choose not to include my physical disabilities for a second in this conversation, is that I cannot just go and do any kind of exercise that's available to me. It has to be something that I am interested in and can keep my attention, but not be too difficult or too challenging that I give up on that activity. I struggle with having many barriers in the way for me personally, even to access physical activity, that I feel like are very misunderstood in ADHDers in general. Things that don't appear to be a barrier to a lot of neurotypical people often are for ADHDers. So some of my personal barriers are things like my location. I'm very rural, and that means there is nowhere that I can just easily walk to within a few minutes, or just easily get on a quick bus or anything like that. Like I was saying, the cost of things as well. Any other additional admin required, like having to sign up for a gym membership, signing up for classes, makes it less likely that I'm going to do it. Being required to attend something regularly. A lot of classes, especially that are more like skill related, you know, things like martial arts or dance, you know, things like that. They tend to expect you to go every week for the entire term, which is just generally unrealistic for a lot of ADHDers in general, and also kind of like removes the opportunity to even try something new, because you have to buy a bulk of 6, 8, 12 all at once, which also is a lot of money to just have and be able to spend, which again, many people in general, regardless of ADHD, right now just do not have. I also would say barriers for me are if your website is difficult to use, I will probably give up rather than pursuing through. Having to leave my house, having to then get in the car, having to then find a parking spot, particularly when many areas the parking is not free, or like the parking is always busy. It's always busy. And then after all that, to then go and do the activity that you were planning on doing already, and then to come home, to then also have a shower, to get changed, more clothes for the laundry that you haven't done for 3 weeks, or more clean laundry to add to the pile that you haven't put away for the last 4 months. You know, all of these small extra steps are additional barriers to people with ADHD. A lot of neurotypical people just don't really understand at all. And of course, in general, even if you do have access to a gym nearby and not have any of these additional issues to contend with, the cost of accessing these things is bad enough. And many people with ADHD have the intentions of signing up to something that costs you a regular amount of money, but end up not being able to keep it up due to, you know, whatever the reason is. Anything from not having the time, but also, I mean, just not having the time can also be time blindness. I always forget the right word for, because I don't like to use time blindness. So I'll put the thing there, but I always forget the bloody name for it because it's a bit of a mouthful. But, you know, because we perceive time differently, that could literally be the reason why we don't have time, even if to a neurotypical we do. To also having a lack of motivation to continually do something, being overwhelmed by too many options or too many things you should be doing. Many people with their ADHD will forget that they have a paid for subscription and will continue to lose that money for a thing that they are not even using, that they may not even actually be able to afford anyway in the first place, but made the rationalization that if they could consistently use this thing or do this thing, then it was worth paying for. Whilst in general, I think there was some good points made in this documentary episode, as it is only 1 hour. It's only an hour episode. There's only so much you can fit into that, you know? And it is following a specific person and not like a presenter of ADHD in general. They can't cover everything and can't cover it with the nuance it needs. There were some good points made that aren't made very often that I think a lot of people would benefit from seeing. However, I do think in general this episode is mostly just watching a very well-off white woman talk about the problem she has, but is still somehow able to manage and deal with it because she has all of the time in the world to decide what she does and when, but also having money to her advantage and being able to pay somebody to make up where she is lacking. They don't actually acknowledge what it is that they do to make up for those areas where she does struggle. There isn't any actual clarification of what they do have in place. So ideally, I would have included more of an acknowledgement of what they are actually doing, what they have been able to manage to do for the ADHD for two people in their family, as this does kind of come off as a we're just like you, we have ADHD as well and struggle, when actually really they are nothing like the average person, because they have so many resources at their own disposal that the average person just does not have. There is also a general lack of acknowledgement about public services and resources to do with ADHD. In many ways, I do think that people who have got plenty of money, such as, you know, a footballer's wife or family like this one, should be paying for their own support. Like, you know, you don't need free support, you have plenty of money. You know, they don't need to use public services like adult social care or disability benefits, etc., because the services are already very underfunded, but, you know, oversubscribed as well, and many people with ADHD struggle to get support through the systems already in place, regardless of if they have other conditions or just ADHD. So if you have your own resources, you should use them, i.e. your money, your own money. But it does mean that we don't really talk a lot about the public options and what they are and what realistically it's like to go through those processes, especially for some people to navigate through. At least in Sam Thompson's documentary, he did speak to a handful of other people who weren't celebrities, who had a slightly different experience of a later diagnosis, and were from a few varied backgrounds. And he did acknowledge that there was a very long waiting list on the NHS if he wanted an ADHD assessment, and did comment on the cost of going privately, even though he did make a big complaint about having to pay over £1,000 or like around £1,000 for these assessments, which just comes off again a little bit daft when you were literally on Made in Chelsea. Shut up. But at least there was an acknowledgement of the wait list and the cost of those things, like what the options are. Whereas I don't think there was any conversation around this in particular in this documentary episode with Tanya. It is a shame sometimes that we only seem to watch these kind of documentaries, or even these kinds of documentary episodes, from people who already have some kind of platform, as they just live in a different world. They just live in a different world, right? They don't live like the rest of us who are watching. They live a different life compared to the majority of people in the UK, the majority of people who are watching these TV programs. So whilst I enjoy watching these things just to see what different people are talking about in their own experiences, it is frustrating that they are all through very rich people's lenses, with next to no documentation of an average person's experience of these things, which is my personal reason for why I make videos online about my own experiences. And even then, of course, there are the different elements that I have privilege in, such as, you know, being a white person, as well as being able and allowed to live at home and be supported by my family, which many people do not have. So like how I appreciated the BPD documentary that I covered a while ago, that it was a man talking about his experience of BPD, which is rarely shared, I appreciate that this short documentary episode with Tanya covers the experience of being a late diagnosed woman and also being a parent of a child with ADHD whilst also having ADHD yourself. I do kind of wish there was a bit more in-depth about how other family members manage and support these two. However, there really wasn't much detailed generally anywhere, and there was a short section where Tanya went to a parent support group, but I can't really remember if the support group was just for parents of children with ADHD or if the parents were also ADHDers as well, but I think it was just a support group of parents with children who have ADHD. But that is pretty much everything that I wanted to discuss about this episode of ADHD in Me by Tanya Bardsley. Yeah, it's been a bit of a wild few months starting off the year of 2025, so a lot of my videos have been kind of bulk filmed and then bulk edited, and I've just not filmed for large periods of time, so it kind of feels weird doing it that way, whereas like pretty much all of last year and a few years before it has been me recording basically a video, maybe 2 videos every week. So yeah, it just feels a bit odd doing it like this at the moment. But hopefully my new microphone did its job and we have a nice audio quality for my video where you don't pick up all of the background noise. That'll be amazing. That'll be amazing. But yeah, that is it from me this week. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Maybe you should go and watch my other video where I was covering the Sam Thompson documentary. Go and watch that next. Let me know what you think. And I will see you next week. Bye.